neglecting a very important issue can lead to disastrous circumstances. When there is an injury in the body, we must look into that injury right away. If we let it go and neglect the injury, then over time it can add up to a huge problem, and only when it starts to affect the individuals or affects me and affects my life, then we will wake up to that reality. So it's always good to address issues, and here address the issue of problems in Christian marriages today. Now, in the Bible, there is Jesus' view. Now, when Jesus came, it was a time when there was a lot of debate and discussion going on about marriage and divorce among scribes and Pharisees. And Jesus was asked by the Pharisees about divorce because they were the ones who were involved in this kind of marriage and divorce, and changing wives and so on. Now, as we look at Jesus' views, we must also remember God's views. At the beginning. Now, Jesus was against divorce and remarriage. Jesus was against divorce and remarriage. And this view of Jesus is for all Christians. Is for all Christians. Now, as we study the Gospels and what Jesus had to say about this all-important topic, Jesus made two laws, or he spoke two laws, and he also mentioned a leeway, and he also brings in a lady. So he is given an explanation, and he's also given an exception, and he gives us an example. Now, what were the two laws that Jesus gave? The two laws were: anyone who divorces and remarries a woman commits adultery. Anyone who divorces and remarries a woman commits adultery. The second law is: anyone who marries a divorcee commits adultery. Anyone who marries a divorcee commits adultery. Now, these two laws are written in the Gospel of Mark and Luke. And this leads us to the issue of adultery when it comes to divorce and remarriage in Christian marriages. And the adultery here is referring to sexual immorality, or what we call sexual sins. Now, Jesus has given us this explanation, these two laws. Now, this issue of sexual immorality leads us to the leeway or the exception, which is found only in Matthew's Gospel. And that exception is that you can divorce your wife for sexual sin or sexual immorality. Now, from this exception or leeway, we get two words. One is adultery and the other is fornication. Now, here for this exception, Jesus did not use the word adultery, but he used the word fornication. And this exception, mentioned only in Matthew's Gospel and not in Mark and Luke, is in specific reference to the Jewish people, and it is to refer to the Jewish law and culture. That is why this exception. But very important to note that the word Jesus is using here is fornication. So what is adultery and what is fornication? Adultery is sins of a married person, and fornication is sins of a single person, sexual sins. Now, coming back to these two laws, which says anyone who divorces and remarries a woman commits adultery. Anyone who marries a divorcee commits adultery. Now, very important to note that a divorce does not end a marriage, but it is death that ends a marriage. So, when a married person divorces their partner and marries another person, while that previous partner is still alive, that is a sin in the sight of God. That is a sin in the sight of God. Because as long as your partner is alive in your marriage, you are married to them. And a divorce does not become valid in the sight of God. It is only death of a partner that ends a marriage according to God's view. Now, coming to the lady, or the example that Jesus gave in John's Gospel, is about the lady caught in adultery. They brought a lady who was caught in adultery, and they were ready to stone her. And so they are asking Jesus for his answer to this issue of the woman caught in adultery. Now, according to Jewish law, both a man and a woman are to be stoned for such an act. And you cannot be a witness to such an act if you yourself have committed that sin. And in a case, you need 2 or 3 witnesses for prosecuting the case. Now, these 3 are part of the Jewish law. And as Jesus responded to them by writing on the sand with his own fingers, slowly, one by one, they left. And there were no witnesses there. And so the case was completely dismissed by Jesus. But Jesus gave her, the lady, a very important message. He said, get out of that adulterous life. Get out of that adulterous life. When Jesus wrote with his own fingers on the sand, it was very significant because it was to remind the Jews of God's own fingers writing the commandments and giving it to Moses and writing it with his own hands. So having studied all this, what is the conclusion? So we have understood Jesus' view and who is asking the question about marriage and divorce and remarriage. Then Jesus' view for all of us Christians, and then his 2 laws, and then the leeway for the Jews, and then the example of the lady caught in adultery. So having studied all this, the conclusion is, when we are single before marriage, we must keep ourselves pure and take time to pray and discern the will of God and to find the right partner for marriage. Never rush into a marriage. And after we are married to that God-given partner, according to God's will, enjoy your sex life within the context of your marriage between husband and wife. That husband and that wife. A very important study for us today in the context of where we stand in Christian marriages and divorce and remarriage today. Now, in the next presentation, we will look at Paul's view and the church's view on this all